is forced to marry a homeless man by her father. She initially resents him, but gradually realizes his kindness and falls in love with him. She learns the value of hard work and supports her father when he falls ill. The concept of forced marriages has been a topic of discussion for a long time. In some parts of the world, it is still a common practice. However, the idea of marrying someone you don't know or love can be daunting. This is the story of a protagonist who is forced to marry a homeless man by her father. At first, the protagonist resents the man and is reluctant to accept him, but as time passes, she begins to realize the man's kindness and falls in love with him. This is a classic example of how love can blossom even in the most unexpected situations. The story also teaches us the value of hard work. The protagonist learns that life can be tough, but with hard work and determination, one can overcome any obstacle. She supports her father when he falls ill, which shows her commitment and dedication towards her family. In conclusion, the story of the protagonist teaches us many valuable lessons. It shows us that love can come from unexpected places and that hard work can pay off in the end. It also highlights the importance of family and how we should always be there to support them during tough times. This story is a testament to the power of love and the resilience of the human spirit. Protagonist opposes the arranged marriage and insults the homeless man. The protagonist had never been one to follow convention, and the idea of an arranged marriage was no exception. She had always dreamed of finding love on her own terms, not being forced into a union with a stranger simply because of her social status. When her parents approached her with the news of the arranged marriage, the protagonist was livid. She refused to accept their decision and lashed out at them, insulting them for their outdated beliefs. As she stormed out of the house, she came across a homeless man on the street. In her anger, she didn't think twice before insulting him as well, blaming him for her own problems. It wasn't until later that she realized the error of her ways. She had allowed her anger to cloud her judgment, and in doing so, had hurt someone who had done nothing to deserve it. The protagonist knew that she had to make things right. She apologized to her parents for her outburst and agreed to consider the arranged marriage. She also sought out the homeless man and apologized for her insensitive remarks, offering to help him in any way she could. In the end, the protagonist learned that sometimes it takes humility and compassion to make things right, even if it means going against one's own desires. Protagonist is taken to the homeless man's RV home and finds it cozy. As the protagonist stepped inside the RV, he was surprised to find it cozy and homely. The cramped space was filled with an assortment of items, from blankets and pillows to pots and pans. The walls were adorned with pictures and posters, and a small television was playing in the corner. The homeless man, who had introduced himself as Jack, motioned for the protagonist to take a seat on a worn-out couch. "Make yourself at home," Jack said with a smile. "Sorry about the mess. It's hard to keep things tidy in such a small space." The protagonist nodded and looked around, taking in his surroundings. Despite the cramped quarters, Jack had done an excellent job of making the RV feel like a home. The warm lighting and comfortable furniture made it feel inviting, and the protagonist felt himself relax for the first time in days. "Can I get you anything?" Jack asked, rummaging through a small fridge. "I've got some water, soda and some snacks if you're hungry." The protagonist declined, feeling a bit guilty about accepting hospitality from a man who had so little. But Jack insisted, and soon the two were sharing a bag of chips and talking like old friend. As the night wore on, the protagonist couldn't help but feel grateful for the unexpected kindness of a stranger. Despite his circumstances, Jack had welcomed him with open arms and made him feel at home. And for that, the protagonist would always be grateful. Protagonist gets a job and starts supporting herself and her father. As a young woman, Sarah had always dreamed of being independent and making a name for herself. However, with her father's health declining and her family struggling financially, she knew that finding a job was no longer just a dream, but a necessity. After weeks of searching, Sarah finally landed a job at a local restaurant. It wasn't her dream job, but it paid enough to cover her bills and help support her father's medical expenses. She worked hard, often putting in long hours, but she was grateful for the opportunity to support her family. As the weeks turned into months, Sarah began to feel a sense of pride in her work. She enjoyed interacting with the customers and learning new skills in the kitchen. Her co-workers were supportive and helpful, and she found herself feeling part of a team. Despite the challenges she faced, Sarah was determined to succeed. She worked tirelessly to save money and provide for her family, even when it meant sacrificing her own needs and wants. Her father was proud of her and grateful for everything she did for him. As time passed, Sarah realized that her job had given her more than just financial stability. It had given her confidence, self-respect, and a sense of purpose. She had proven to herself that she was capable of taking care of herself and her family, and that was a feeling that no amount of money could buy. In the end, Sarah's hard work paid off. She was able to save enough money to move her father into a better living situation and even start putting some money away for her own future. She knew that life would continue to bring challenges, but with her newfound strength and determination, she was ready to face them head-on. Protagonist apologizes to her father and realizes her love for the homeless man. As she walked towards her father's house, the protagonist couldn't help but feel a heavy weight in her chest. She knew she had made a mistake by running away and leaving her family behind. She had been angry and frustrated with her father's strict rules and had thought that leaving was the only way to escape his control. But as she stood on his doorstep, she realized how wrong she had been. Her father had always loved her and wanted the best for her, but she had been too blinded by her own anger to see it. Tears streamed down her face as she begged for his forgiveness. "I'm sorry, Dad," she said, her voice trembling. "I should have never left like that. I was wrong." Her father's eyes softened as he hugged her tightly. "I forgive you," he said. "I just want you to be safe and happy." As the days passed, the protagonist found herself wandering the streets, unable to shake the guilt and shame she felt for abandoning her family. It was then that she saw him, the homeless man who had been sleeping on the corner of her street for as long as she could remember. She had always avoided him, thinking he was just another drunk or drug addict. But as she watched him from a distance, she saw something in his eyes that made her heart ache. He looked so lonely and lost, just like she had felt when she had run away from home. Slowly, she approached him, offering him a sandwich and a kind word. They talked for a while, and she learned that he had lost everything: his job, his home, his family. He was just like her, in a way, lost and alone. As she walked away, she realized that she had fallen in love with him, not in a romantic way, but in a way that made her want to help him. She knew that she couldn't fix all of his problems, but she could at least be there for him, just like her father had always been there for her. And so, the protagonist spent her days volunteering at the local shelter and helping the homeless man in any way she could. She had finally found her purpose in life: to help those who had lost everything, just like she had. Protagonist confesses her feelings to the homeless man, who reveals he is a successful doctor. The protagonist took a deep breath and looked into the eyes of the homeless man she had been helping for months. "I have to tell you something," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I have feelings for you." The homeless man looked surprised, then smiled. "I have feelings for you too," he said, "but there's something I need to tell you." He took a deep breath and looked down at his dirty clothes. "I'm not really homeless," he said. "I'm a doctor. A successful one, in fact." The protagonist was shocked. "What? Why are you living on the streets then?" The man shrugged. "I needed to escape. My life was too stressful, too overwhelming. I needed to get away from it all." The protagonist felt a mix of emotions: relief that the man she cared for was not really homeless, but also confusion and hurt that he had lied to her. "Why didn't you tell me before?" she asked. The man looked sheepish. "I didn't want you to treat me differently. I wanted to see if you would care for me as a person, not just because of my job or status." The protagonist thought about his words and realized that he was right. She had cared for him because he was kind, thoughtful, and funny, not because of his circumstances. They talked for hours, discussing their feelings and hopes for the future. The man promised to leave the streets and return to his life as a doctor, but only if the protagonist agreed to go on a date with him. She smiled and agreed, feeling grateful for the lessons she had learned about judging people based on their appearance, and for the unexpected love that had blossomed between her and the homeless man who turned out to be so much more. Protagonist supports her father during his illness and finds love, companionship, and a father-daughter relationship. As she watched her father's health deteriorate, the protagonist knew she had to be there for him. She put her life on hold to care for him, taking him to doctor's appointments, cooking his meals, and keeping him company. It wasn't easy, but she loved her father and wanted to make sure he was comfortable. One day, while at a support group for caregivers, she met a man named Jack. He had been taking care of his mother, who was suffering from dementia, and the two bonded over their shared experiences. They started spending time together, going on walks, watching movies, and talking about their lives. As their relationship grew, the protagonist found herself falling in love with Jack. It was a surprise to her, as she hadn't been looking for romance while taking care of her father. But Jack was kind, patient, and understanding, and she felt like she could be herself around him. What surprised her even more was the bond that formed between Jack and her father. They would sit and talk for hours, sharing stories about their lives and experiences. It was like Jack had become a surrogate son to her father, and the protagonist was grateful for the companionship he provided. As her father's health continued to decline, the protagonist knew she couldn't do it alone anymore. Jack offered to help, and together they made sure her father was comfortable and cared for until the end. In the months that followed, the protagonist and Jack continued to support each other through their grief. They knew that their love had been born out of a difficult situation, but it had brought them closer together and given them a new family in each other.